All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time we're taking a look at something pretty ancient and definitely makes you think. The flower of life. It's this geometric pattern, circles overlapping and all. It pops up in sacred spots all over the world, And, get this, some folks believe it holds like secrets to understanding how the entire universe works.
I know, right? It's amazing how this one symbol has had thinkers hooked for, well, centuries. Think about it. From those temples in Egypt to Leonardo da Vinci himself studying it, it's like the flower of life is trying to tell us something deep about, what's really real.
Definitely makes you curious to dig deeper.
Yeah.
But before we go full-on deep dive, can you paint a picture for folks who might not be totally familiar with the flower of life? I mean, what's it look like?
Okay, so imagine a circle, right? And around that circle are 6 more circles, same size, all touching. Then just keep going, adding more circles around, all overlapping. You get this like flower pattern, super symmetrical, kind of beautiful, actually.
Ah, so that's how it got the name. Makes sense. Now, where does this idea come from that the symbol holds all these secrets about the universe?
Well, a lot of people see it as a kind of like a blueprint for how everything was created, visually showing the basic patterns and laws that run the cosmos. It's like something that shows how everything's connected.
That's a pretty big claim. But I gotta admit, the thought that this simple shape could have such deep meaning, it is really interesting.
Right. And what's even wilder is how actor Terrence Howard, he's looked at the flower of life and tied it to changing how we think about math, like big time.
Now, this is where I get really intrigued. I know Howard has some pretty, let's say, outside-the-box ideas about math. What exactly is he suggesting?
Okay, so Howard really challenges the core of traditional math, the thing it's built on, Euclidean geometry, straight lines, angles, flat planes. He says, nope. The universe doesn't work that way. He's all about curves, waves, things constantly moving. That's what's fundamental, he says.
I can kind of see his point. Out in nature, it's curves everywhere you look. Galaxies spiraling, the shape of seashells, how water flows. It's not a stretch to think those same ideas might apply on a huge cosmic level.
Exactly. And Howard, he uses these examples all the time to make his point. He really believes all this focus on straight lines and approximations in math, it might be holding us back, from really understanding the universe, from making big discoveries.
Okay, can you give an example? How does he actually see this playing out in math itself?
One that's really cool is the square root of 2. He says if you keep cubing that number and then dividing by 2 over and over, it creates this math loop. You always end up back at the same value.
Wait, so you're saying there's a pattern, like a cycle, hidden inside what seems like a pretty basic math operation?
Exactly. And his whole argument is this messes with the idea that math is just linear, predictable. Instead, he's saying there are loops and curves built right into how numbers work.
Whoa, that's mind-blowing. If he's right, that could totally change how we understand math and how it connects to the universe.
Absolutely could. Howard believes this loop in the square root of 2, it's just one tiny example of a much bigger principle going on. He wants a total, audit of math. We got to reassess everything, he says, to account for how the universe is inherently curved.
So not just little tweaks. He's talking about a fundamental shift in how we approach math altogether.
That's it. And this leads us to another spot where Howard applies his ideas. The Platonic solids.
The what now? Can you remind me about those?
Oh, sure. The Platonic solids are these 5 three-dimensional shapes. There's the tetrahedron, cube, octahedron, dodecahedron, and icosahedron. They've kind of fascinated mathematicians forever. They're special because they're all made up of the same perfectly regular shapes on their sides. And in geometry, they're super important because they're perfectly symmetrical.
Oh, yeah, right. I vaguely remember those from school. They are cool shapes, but honestly, I never really got their deeper meaning. What's the connection to Howard's ideas?
Well, Howard's suggesting that even how we understand these shapes, as perfect as they seem, could be incomplete. He thinks to really get the Platonic solids, how they relate to the universe, we got to see them through the lens of curves and waves.
So he's basically saying even these fundamental shapes, which seem so solid, so unchanging, might need to be reinterpreted because of his whole curved perspective.
Exactly. He's not saying the Platonic solids are wrong. It's more like they might be a simplified, a flat version of something way more complex, something multidimensional.
This is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about math.
Right. That's the cool part. Whether you agree with Howard or not, his ideas, they make you think. They challenge us to step outside our comfort zone and be like, hey, what if there's more to the universe, more to math than we realize?
I'm definitely feeling that sense of wonder right now. It's like we just opened a door to a whole new way of seeing the world.
And that's just the beginning. Next, we'll get into how Howard believes these ideas could actually be used, especially when it comes to some really ambitious goals, like traveling to other stars. Okay, so far we've been looking at how Terrence Howard sees the universe, right? All through this lens of curves and waves. And he's really going against traditional math, that whole Euclidean geometry thing. But where does all this lead us? What's the point?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering too. It's cool to rethink math concepts and all, but how do you actually use those ideas? In the real world, I mean.
That's where things get even more, I don't know, mind-blowing maybe. Howard believes that if we can really get this curved perspective, it could open up some crazy possibilities, especially when it comes to, space exploration.
Okay, you got my attention. Tell me more about this curved math and space travel connection.
Imagine you're trying to navigate across this huge curved ocean, but you're only using straight lines to measure. You'd probably get totally lost, right? And that's what Howard's saying about space travel. If we're ever going to make it to other stars, we can't just rely on straight line calculations. Those approximations, they won't cut it.
So to get across those massive distances between stars, we need to understand how the universe curves.
Exactly. And he thinks the flower of life, remember, with all those overlapping circles, it might actually hold the key to figuring out a more precise way, a better way to understand and travel through space.
That's a pretty wild idea. It's like
Yeah.
he's saying the flower of life is some kind of cosmic map just waiting for us to decode it.
Kinda, yeah. Howard sees it as this visual representation of how matter and energy are spread out in the universe, like a code that shows us the hidden patterns behind creation. And he believes if we can crack that code, we could understand how space and time are connected, like really connected. And that could lead to breakthroughs in how we power spacecraft and how we navigate through space.
Whoa, if he's right, that could totally revolutionize space exploration. We wouldn't just be hopping between planets. We'd be surfing the curves of the cosmos, riding a wave of energy almost.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it could mean a much more, I don't know, harmonious, sustainable way to travel in space, one that works with how the universe naturally flows instead of fighting against it.
It's hard not to get excited about all this, but we got to be realistic too. Are there any, actual scientists backing up Howard's ideas?
Well, to be honest, most scientists see Howard's ideas as pretty unconventional. They don't really accept his take on the flower of life or his criticisms of Euclidean geometry. Not yet, at least.
That's understandable, I guess. It's always good to be a little skeptical of ideas that are way out there. But at the same time, we should be open to new possibilities, right? Especially when they challenge how we think things work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just dismissing an idea because it's not mainstream, that can be just as bad for science as blindly believing something. It's about being curious, thinking critically, and exploring these ideas with an open mind, while also wanting evidence and, real analysis.
So how do we actually evaluate Howard's ideas? Is there a way to test his theories or see if we can use them?
That's the million-dollar question, and it gets to the heart of how science works. So even though Howard's ideas aren't widely accepted by scientists right now, they could inspire new research, new experiments. For example, his whole focus on curves and waves that could lead to new mathematical models or computer simulations, things we can actually test and refine over time.
So even if his specific ideas about the flower of life or the square root of 2 don't turn out to be right, just thinking about these things could lead to important discoveries later on.
Exactly. Think about it. Throughout history, the biggest breakthroughs in science have often come from people who dared to question everything. They explored ideas that seemed crazy at the time, like Galileo, who said, hey, maybe the Earth goes around the sun, or Einstein, who completely changed how we think about space, time, and gravity.
It's a good reminder that science isn't always a straight line, right? There are twists and turns, unexpected things pop up, and sometimes those out there ideas lead to the most amazing insights.
I agree. And who knows, maybe someday, years from now, we'll look back at Howard's ideas and see them as the start of a whole new era in science, like a shift in how we understand the universe that opens up all sorts of possibilities.
I love that way of looking at it. It reminds us that learning is a journey. We should always be open to new ideas, even if they challenge what we think we know.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why these kinds of conversations are so valuable, where we can explore those unconventional ideas, think critically, and expand our understanding of the world around us.
Totally agree. It's been a fascinating dive so far, and I'm excited to keep exploring these ideas. But before we wrap up, I'm curious, what does all this mean for the average person? Can we apply these concepts to our own lives, even if we're not, like mathematicians or physicists?
That's a great question. And I think one of the most important things we can take away from all this, from the flower of life and Howard's ideas, is that we need to embrace a more holistic view of the world, like see how everything is connected.
Can you say more about that? What does it mean to have a more holistic view of the world? How does it connect to all this stuff we've been talking about?
Sure. So a lot of times we tend to put our knowledge and experiences into separate boxes. Science over here, spirituality over there, logic separate from intuition, ourselves separate from nature. But the flower of life, with all those interconnected patterns, it suggests that everything is actually part of this one big unified whole.
So instead of thinking we're separate from the universe, we should see ourselves as part of it, connected to everything.
Yeah. And that interconnectedness, it's not just some philosophical idea, it's a real principle of the universe. You see it in everything. From how particles are entangled on a quantum level to the complex web of life here on Earth.
I see the connection. If we recognize that we're all interconnected, maybe we can start to change our perspective, like shift from this feeling of separation and competition to one of collaboration and working together.
Exactly. And that's where I think we can find real practical applications for these concepts, even if they seem abstract. Whether or not you fully buy into Howard's theories about curved mathematics or the flower of life, the idea that everything is connected, it can be a really powerful way to live a more meaningful life. A life that makes more sense.
Yeah, that's a tough one, like we've been talking about all this heady stuff, curved space-time, cosmic maps, but how does that actually play out in my regular life?
Well, I think it starts with just noticing, becoming aware of those connections in the world around you. Look for those spirals in nature, how energy flows, the cycles in ecosystems, even our own bodies. We've got rhythms and cycles that connect us to the bigger rhythms of, well, everything.
So like paying attention to those little connections can help us feel that sense of oneness.
Yeah, exactly. But it goes beyond just seeing it. It's about understanding that our actions, even the tiny ones, they have ripple effects. The choices we make, how we treat each other, even our thoughts, they all feed into this big web of life.
So with that awareness comes a sense of responsibility, right?
For sure. Once you see yourself as part of that web, it's hard to ignore the impact you have. You start thinking more about how your choices affect not just you, but the people around you, the environment, everything.
That makes sense. It's like shifting from me to how can I help the whole thing work better?
Exactly. And that's where I think these big abstract ideas can become real. Even if you don't totally agree with Howard's theories about the math or the flower of life, that core message of interconnectedness, it's a powerful way to think about how to live a better life, a more meaningful life.
It reminds us we're not just these separate beings. We're all taking part in this huge cosmic dance.
And that dance can take so many forms. It might be through kindness, or creating something that lifts other people up, or even just making choices that help us live in harmony with nature.
It's about figuring out how to flow with the universe.
Yeah.
How to add to the beauty and wonder of it all.
Yeah, and you don't need fancy degrees or equations for that. Just an open mind, a willingness to see things differently, and a commitment to living in a way that honors those connections between us and everything else.
That's a great way to wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the flower of life to actually changing how we live.
It's been a blast exploring this with you, and I hope everyone listening feels, inspired to keep going on their own journey, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep searching for those connections that tie us all together.
Thanks so much for sharing your insights. Until next time, folks, stay curious and keep exploring all the amazing things the universe has to offer, both inside and out.